You are listening to The Exchange on Siouxland Public Media. I'm Mary Hartnett. Today on the program, we talk with the candidates who won election and re-election in Tuesday's City School general election. Later on, in anticipation of Veterans Day, we hear the stories of some Iowa and Nebraska veterans who have served our country. We also talk with Support Siouxland Soldiers about the nonprofit's efforts to aid veterans in the area with food assistance and connections to services. The group is holding a fundraiser Friday evening. We also hear from local historian Russ Givard about the origins of Veterans Day. But the big story of Tuesday night's local and school elections was that Julie Schoenherr was re-elected to the Sioux City Council by a narrow margin after a tough campaign. According to the results, Schoenherr topped opponent Tom Murphy by a mere 113 points in Tuesday's election. Schoenherr held on to the one open seat on the Sioux City Council. Coming into the election, Schoenherr had the most votes in the primary with 1,006, and Murphy came in second with 762 votes. Murphy is retired, but he formerly worked as the chief building inspector for the city of Sioux City. Meeting with her supporters at Soho American Kitchen and Bar last night, a business she formerly owned and operated, Schoenherr said she was very happy to have the support of Siouxlanders and wanted to get to work on two major issues. Julie, this is a big night for you.
It's a huge night for me. I'm so thankful for my last 4 years, and I'm even more thankful for my next 4 years.
What are some of your most important goals for the next 4 years?
Most important goals are going to be housing. I really want to tackle housing. We've got to get homes and apartments ready for folks who want to live here. That's the core of economic development. If we want to lure employers, we also have to have housing for their employees to live. And so that's super important to me.
Well, I know the wastewater treatment plant continues to be an issue. How much did that play a part in this election?
It played an enormous part in this election. Our president of our Chamber of Commerce was not in favor of the wastewater treatment plant project. There were some great misunderstandings on how it's been handled. But I will say that I have to trust the 50 to 100 people who are the experts in that industry. We've hired a company, an engineering firm who's been in the business for more than 70 years, and that's all they do. We are determined and committed to get this rebuild done correctly this time around. And it's not for necessarily just our generation today, but it's for our kids and our grandkids. It's super important. And these votes, they're not always easy. But I vote for what is right, not for what others necessarily want.
This week, the council voted to go ahead and say we think SkyWest would be a good thing to have at the Sioux City Gateway Airport. You also talked about the CO2 pipelines and saying you really would not like to have them here. And those are two things, those are big issues for people, transportation and those pipelines.
Right. The transportation issue is that SkyWest has done a great job in the past. They have done great routes. People are attracted to what they offer us, and we want to continue with them. We'll work with the DOT, and we'll get that approved. The CO2, CO2 has a lot of traction right now. But I think the part that was a stickler for some of the council members, especially myself, was the fact that they were using eminent domain to come across farmers' property and other people's property. It has not been deemed that the CO2 pipeline is an actual utility that is necessary. Carbon capture might be a good idea, the CO2 capture. I am not against it by any means. However, eminent domain belongs to a utility that can do best for everyone. I think they needed to kind of revisit where we're going with that.
It was a tough campaign and a close race, actually, at the end.
It was a tough campaign. It was a tough race. But I have to say that with truth comes confidence. I think that in the end, my being genuine, my really wanting to work for the city, my dedication, the topics that I am so interested in, I think that prevailed. And I appreciate everyone who voted for me, everyone who helped me through my campaign, and I can't thank you all enough.
That was Sioux City Council member Julie Schoenherr. She narrowly edged out former Sioux City Chief Building Inspector Tom Murphy, 51 to 49% in Tuesday night's election. And now we'll turn to the school board elections. In that election, there are some new faces and one well-known member who was re-elected. 11 candidates were vying for 5 spots on the school board. Incumbent board member Dan Greenwell was elected to serve the last 2 years of the school board term of Perla Alarcon Flory. He defeated Sioux City's first community inclusion liaison, Semhar Gaber-Keeden, 57 to 42%. I talked with Greenwell at the Woodbury County Courthouse on Tuesday night as the final results rolled in. He talked about why he believes his message resonated with voters. What do you think in your message to people got through? Because there were so many messages back and forth in this race. What do you think that you focused on that people really kind of liked?
Well, I think there were really 2 key things in my mind. Well, 3 key things in my mind. Back to better behavior in the classroom, better discipline. That leads in turn to teachers liking their jobs, wanting to come here to teach. The behavior in the classroom deterioration we had over the last several years was just unacceptable. We changed it last year. We're changing it again this year. We'll continue to enhance that to provide teachers a better teaching environment and making sure that the kids who are misbehaving, they have an opportunity to learn outside the classroom in a different environment. So that was one of the things. Heavy recruitment and retention of teachers was the main focus, and updating the curriculum to get a better curriculum for middle school reading. We're teaching spelling, vocabulary, phonics back again. Those fell off our agenda a number of years ago, and it showed in the test results. I think the other thing is good financial management practices. The district is in the best financial shape ever, and I'm very proud of that I led that charge to maintain discipline over taxpayers' money and respect taxpayers' money. Best financial condition ever with the lowest tax rates over the last 4 years. So better savings, lower taxes, better behaved students, better curriculum, retaining and recruit teachers. I think all of those were key elements. We didn't have any divisive topics. There were a lot of divisive topics in the campaign. We didn't go that route at all. We went towards positive improvements we've been making, and I think the voters saw that and voted accordingly.
A big issue has been sort of the diversity initiative with all the students in the school system from all over the world, a lot of different languages. What would you like to see happen to try and, deal with that and provide, better services, especially the issue of language? It seems like it's kind of an expensive thing to deal with.
Well, there's really 2 areas we focused on this year is addressing our ELL, English Language Learner students. The services we were providing and the structure was set up so it wouldn't really work very well. And the number of teachers that are dual language teachers, we just didn't have the numbers, so we increased that. That was an important thing. And that's 20% of our students are English language learning. As far as the DEI practices, we've adopted those in our curriculum and in our instruction, so I think we've made good headway there. Our focus, though, really is focusing on teaching kids to read, to write, to do math, and to behave. And if we can get those done, the rest will fall right in place. So all of those make for a well-rounded district, and I think we're well on our way to taking those positions and continuing to advance those initiatives.
Do you think with COVID money sort of ending, do you think it'll make a difference in how you look at the finances of the school district?
I think it always makes a difference, but I think we've got a very strong Chief Financial Officer, Patty Blankenship, in the district. She's very experienced. She and I can almost finish each other's sentences. She's done a wonderful job over the last several years, and she has us well positioned to know where the levers are to pull. And yes, there'll be some tightening of the belt in some areas, but we're going to focus on staffing the classrooms. Focus on the classrooms, not on administrative procedures, and that will clearly be the focus for this, hopefully for this board, and we'll continue that focus. That's what we've done for the last several years. I'm hopeful we'll continue doing that again.
Looks like you're going to have some new faces on the board. This should kind of be a new environment, a new start in a way.
Well, I think the ones that are currently in the lead, it's not over yet, but the ones that are currently in the lead seem to have a relatively comfortable lead. and I think they're all experienced people. I think they're going to be a welcomed addition. They're not going to have a steep learning curve. They'll get up to speed right away, and that's something we're looking forward to, having new faces. This is not the first time. When I was originally elected in 19, we had 4 new faces. So quite frankly, we're going to have 4 new faces, and John Myers has been around, so he knows the track, and he's run on the track before. And Lance Imke's a very experienced person, and Trayla Lee seems to have the top vote getter of that. She's very experienced as well. So those 3 candidates will step, or those 3 hopefully electees will step right in and shouldn't miss a beat.
So are you going to run for the president of the board again?
No, I've previously announced earlier, I think it was about a month ago, that no, I think 2 years is enough time, a cycle, and let a new face get in there. And so, no, I'm not going to run for a board leadership position. I've done it for 2 years. I think we've made great progress. It's time to pass the gavel, and it's not about who's running it. It's about the things we can get done. And I'm looking forward to participating as a board member and getting additional things done.
That was Dan Greenwell. He won an election last night to fill out the last 2 years of Perla Alarcon-Fleury's term. Well, there were 4 open seats on the school board this year, and the unofficial results released Tuesday night show that Lance Imke, Trayla Lee, John Myers, and Earl Miller all claimed a spot. Each of them was elected to a 4-year term on the board. At the courthouse, current board member John Myers said he was looking forward to continuing his service. Myers served several years ago on the board. Here's what he had to say.
I'm very pleased, very much humbled that many people supported me. I appreciate the help of my campaign committee, and looking forward to getting to work.
Do you think it's your long experience in education that I think that people know that about you, and that you have years of experience behind you?
The public sector experience, 30 years with the city of Sioux City and then 8 years with the Sioux City School Board. I think between the two, those were 2 variables that a lot of people found convincing, and I appreciate that.
So what is your biggest goal for the next few years on the school board?
Well, what I want to do is to bring back a sense of stability to the board. When I was on the board for the 8 years, we were fairly stable. It's not that we didn't have our tensions. Of course, everybody has tensions, but we got a lot of things done, and I'm looking forward to the next board after we get used to each other, get used to the superintendent. I think we'll be doing just fine.
That was current school board member John Myers, who was elected to a 4-year term on Tuesday night's election. Former attorney at the Heidman law firm Lance Imke was also elected to a 4-year term on the Sioux City School Board. He said he was concerned about retention and teacher pay, an issue that was a priority for all of the school board candidates. I talked to him about that issue and other issues facing the board.
Much of the campaign was focusing on what is the experience of teaching, and is it so frustrating that teachers say, it doesn't matter what you're paying me, I'm not going to be teaching here unless something changes. I think we need to take a look at those kinds of things and make sure that we're doing what we can to make the experience of teaching and being a teacher or a staff member in the Sioux City schools an attractive career option. And you mentioned teacher pay and the like. I think that will need to be a part of it. And I'm also told that the governor's office is aware of this too, and that here ahead of the next legislative session, they are looking at what to do that would enhance teacher pay throughout the state of Iowa. We need to be tuned into that as early on as we can, and make sure that our voice is heard in that, so that we can get support we need for our district.
There's also been a lot of talk about trying to please fix the HVAC issues with high schools. They're 50 years old. We just had some new elementary schools in the last 10 years. Obviously, building new ones does not seem to be affordable, but it's important to keep them up.
Yes, it is important to keep the maintenance up. We do have Pebble Fund money that helps us do that. And there's also, I believe, that the initiative that was on the ballot today that was to approve the direction and the guidance for how to spend this fund of money that the state is offering to do those very kinds of things was updated and approved by our voters so that we can take a look at some of those maintenance and infrastructure pieces.
I guess lastly, how do you think the diversity initiative is going in the schools? Is there anything you'd like to change, to do things a little differently?
Well, I know that there's been a study on diversity, and that brought about some controversy and a little bit of chaos and the like. I think we need to take a fresh look of how you blend the whole picture together. Diversity, one of the strengths that the Sioux City Schools have is our diverse student body and the diversity among our faculty and staff as well. That's a strength, that's not a weakness. It's also what goes on in the rest of the world. So if you're coming to our public school, you're going to be better prepared to what the world is like when you've graduated. So those are all good things, and we need to look at how we make sure that everybody understands and has a piece of the story. And then once I think everybody is included and nobody is excluded from what the history and the story is, that will be a satisfying way to have a good foundation of not only our past, but where we are and where we can go.
Is there anything else you'd like to say?
Well, I'm very strong supporter of the Career Academy, as you know, and I'm one of my principal initiatives or the motives for me to run was to make sure that our Career Academy had very solid support and that we continue to have the wide variety of pathways available to our students. We're finding that students who get introduced to our Career Academy opportunities get more excited about what their high school career is going to be, and it keeps them more engaged, and I think helps us with not only attendance but also our graduation rate. And those are not the drivers, the statistics. The drivers is that we are doing a good job through our Career Academy to have students see how they can fit in to working and having a job and being productive in our society right away after school instead of languishing and trying to figure out what they want to do. It's great if you take a Career Academy path and you don't like it and then you try another one and you find that you do. That would be our hope. Not that you don't like any of them, but if that's the case, that this is a way that we can provide the service of letting you graduate knowing this is what I would be good at and I should pursue.
That was new school board member Lance Emke. Earl Miller was also elected to the school board. Miller is a small business owner. He has 2 children that have gone through the Sioux City schools, and he's talked a lot about the need for diversity and more LGBTQ representation on the board, as well as making teachers feel welcome.
I'm certainly humbled that the people of Sioux City came out and voted for me and heard my message the entire time. I hoped that we would have more diversity on the board in this next couple of years, but we will continue to work for that and make sure that our students are represented.
You talked a lot about, trying to hire more teachers, retain more teachers, make teachers want to stay. Some people say it's about pay. Some people say it's about having a better environment. I think when you talked about it, being a little of both.
Well, I think everybody wants more money, right? All of us, no matter what kind of job you have, you always want more money. That's the reason why everybody goes to work, is to get that paycheck. But really, when you talk to those people that have resigned in the last year, it's really about the environment that they've been in. And so if they can still live in their own house and they can go work in a school district like Hinton or someplace else that's close, but they have that better environment, they're going to go. And we know personally teachers that have left that have taken a huge pay cut because of the environment.
What about the whole issue with fixing up, especially the high schools? They need a lot of work. They're getting old. Obviously, it's very expensive. Where's that money going to come from, do you think? It seems like it's a lot to do.
Well, I think that we're going to have to take a look to see where we can get those funds from. There's probably going to be some kind of referendum that has to come into place. There are certainly no funds probably for the next 5 years. And so it's not going to happen anytime soon, but we do need to start that planning now and not wait until it becomes a crisis like it seems we've done over the last 20, 30, 40 years.
I wanted to talk a bit about the diversity initiative in the schools and trying to make the students and the teachers feel welcome from all walks of life. And do you think that it has made a good beginning? Is there something you would change about it?
Well, again, there was a number of people that represented more of our student population that ran for the school board. I was hoping that they could become a part of the people that were voted in this time so they could come with firsthand conversations. I think as I've gotten to know those other candidates, we've certainly built bonds and we built trust, and so we will be collaborating with them moving forward. We haven't done enough. Certainly we haven't done enough, because I know teachers of color and gays and lesbian teachers that have left the school district because they don't feel safe. And if they don't feel safe, the students can't feel safe. And so we do need to work on that.
Is there anything else you'd like to say that you'd like people to know or you'd like to work on?
I want people to know that I'm a collaborator and I like to find out the information before I make a rash decision, but I will be pushing us to come into this current century.
That was Earl Miller, who was elected to the school board on Tuesday as well. Trayla Lee was elected to the school board Tuesday night, and she works as an adoption recruiter. Her mother, Flora Lee, who passed away in April 2023, served as a Sioux City school board member for 12 years, and she was the first Black woman elected to a public seat in Woodbury County. Lee says she wants to help make change in the district and boost teacher retention.
And I want to make sure that I prioritize all the voters that showed up today to support me, in addition to the committee members that helped me. As it relates to the school board, my priority is to listen and learn and understand how the functionality of the school board exists, and then help make change. But first, I want to make sure that I listen, I learn, understand, and make sure that there is a shortage and what the shortage is. I am concerned about the shortage of educators across the nation, but also as it relates to our school district, and in making sure that our educators feel supported and needed. Lastly, I also want to ensure that we make sure that people feel appreciated and that they are valued for the work that they are doing. I think that with my diverse knowledge and the resources that I have to people within the community to help make change, I think that we still can move along and get some things done. Diversity is it's always going to be a point of interest for me, but it's something that I live and that I am every day. So it's an issue that I have to continuously address. As I reflect back 25 years ago, she was the board president of our Sioux City Community School District, and then it was pointed out to me with one of the people that attended my watch party that I am the only female on our new school board. So I am ready to take the challenge, I am ready to conquer, and I am ready to represent women. Yes. And I'm also ready to implement leadership, change, and help make sure that we are heard, we are listened to, and that change is going to be impactful and a benefit to our educators.
That was new Sioux City School Board member Trayla Lee. The candidates that fell short in the election include Marguerite Cortez, incumbent Philip Hammond, Jebediah Hibbs, Dustin Rhodes, and Tricia Rivers. 3 of the 4 seats were open this year because school board members Monique Scarlett, Bernie Scalero, and Taylor Goodman decided not to run for re-election. The 4th seat was because Dan Greenwell decided not to rerun for a 4-year term. Instead, he ran for the last 2 years of Perla Alarcon-Fleury's term. She resigned from the board earlier this year. Alarcon-Fleury's seat was filled by Philip Hammond, but he decided to run for a 4-year term on the board this time. And on Tuesday, voters in Sioux City voted in favor of a public measure for the Sioux City Community School District. It required 51% of the vote to pass. With just under 80% of voters in favor, it approves the district's revenue purpose statement for the use of SAVE funding from the state of Iowa. A revenue purpose statement describes how school districts can spend penny sales tax SAVE funds, also known as SAVE funds, that the state of Iowa has dedicated to public schools. The current statement ran through 2029, but with the law change now extending the 1-cent sales tax through 2051, a new revenue purpose statement was required. And the last candidate we'll hear from today is Sioux City Mayor Bob Scott. He ran unopposed and was reelected. Scott says one of the city's biggest issues is the updating of the aging wastewater treatment plant.
Well, we have a big sewer plant that we've got to get a handle on, and it's a big project, and we're just we have a lot of really good citizen input going into that, and hopefully community working together, we can figure that problem out and determine what the real needs are and get at least the immediate needs fixed that are life safety issues for our employees down there. I want to make sure we handle those as quickly as possible. The other thing is that we've done an awful lot of things in the last few years, and I think probably this year we're going to put the brakes on a few things and try to slow things down so we don't have to have any kind of significant tax increase. And I think the council will probably be agreeable to that. Unfortunately, it means that we won't do some projects that the citizens will want done, but it just means that they'll have to be put off for a little bit. We're not at our debt capacity, but we don't need to go any more in debt than what we are right now. So some of the streets that we probably have programmed to get fixed will have to be put off for a year or so. We're not going to be doing any trails this year. So it's just time to slow down a little bit and catch our breath. And I hope the council will be for that. I know that where the finance department's wanting us to go, and it's okay.
I also asked Scott about the effect of the council banning CO2 pipelines in Sioux City earlier this week.
Well, we don't have any control over it, but it's not about carbon pipelines for me as much as it is. That's not a public utility, and when they have an easier road, or it appears they may be on an easier road to condemn property than the city is to condemn property for projects that have long-term effects on the community, there's something wrong with the system, and I just don't think that's the way the state ought to go. If the state approves condemnation, they can come right to our board, or they can come inside our city, and we can't do anything about it, which I think is terribly unfortunate. So I don't know what the utility board will rule, but I'm hoping that they rule they're not a public utility.
That was Sioux City Mayor Bob Scott, who was reelected last night. And now we're going to take a look at the fate of a couple of bond issues in the Siouxland region. Voters in the Hinton School District rejected a pair of measures that would have raised millions of dollars to modernize and expand the district's buildings. A total of 425 voters, or just over 50%, approved a $16.1 million bond issue, and a related question to raise the district's maximum debt levy amount to pay off the debt received approval from 400 voters, or about 47.8%. Both measures needed 60% approval to pass under a state law that requires a supermajority for local government referendums that raise property taxes. Two other questions related to the district's physical plant and equipment levy, or PPEL fund, also appeared on the ballot. Each needed 50% approval. A measure to raise the PPL from its current 67 cents to $1.34 per $1,000 in taxable property value for its remaining 2 years won approval. The second question asked voters to extend the PPEL to another 10 years, and that ended in a tie. Voters in the Lawton-Bronson School District soundly defeated a $15.5 million bond issue to extend the junior-senior high school in Lawton. The bond issue called for the construction of a new fine arts center and a larger gym. It received only 44% approval. That measure also required a supermajority of at least 60% to pass under state law. You're listening to The Exchange on Siouxland Public Media. Support for The Exchange comes from Gregory Giles, investment advisor representative with Legacy Financial LLC in Sioux City, serving the financial planning and investment needs of clients since 2004. Information about Legacy Financial and Greg Giles is available at legacyfinancialllc.com. Financial planning and advisory services offered through RDA Financial Network. And support for Siouxland Public Media comes from Unity Point St. Luke's, serving Siouxland multiple locations. Unity Point Clinic is here to provide care for the whole family through life's ups and downs. Our team of family medicine providers are accepting new patients. To learn more about our providers or schedule an appointment, visit unitypoint.org. Veterans Day, November 11th, is this Saturday, and there are commemorations scheduled around Siouxland. One of the local nonprofit groups that works with veterans as they return to the area and also with their families is Support Siouxland Soldiers. The group is holding its annual fundraiser, Dueling Pianos, Friday at the Hard Rock Hotel and Casino. I talked with the group's Rachel Chappell about how the group helps vets and families.
Our main mission is really just to connect veterans and service members and their families together. We do that not only with each other, but also with community resources and just to kind of provide those opportunities to get to know one another, as well as maybe resources that we do, like events that we do too. We do this, we kind of have different community touch points. So a few of the things we do a Waffles for Warrior event where military members and their families can come, and we have a hot breakfast, and they are able to just kind of talk with each other, to have that camaraderie there, and be able to relate to each other. There's been a lot of great friendships that we've seen form, and they're getting a warm meal and making those contacts as well. We have a food pantry. So we do regular food pantries for military families, veterans alike, to come, and they are able to kind of shop our shelves, so to speak. We let them pick what they're wanting off of the shelves so that it's food that they're going to take home and they're going to use. We do emergency grants. So we offer assistance for different needs. Sometimes they're medical needs. Sometimes it is a, grocery situation. Sometimes it's an electric situation. There's so many reasons that they could need assistance. So we kind of help with that. We're able to help, automobiles, things like that. We have a limit for those grants, but the emergency grants is a big part of it. We do deployment dolls, which is kind of fun. So if a loved family member is getting ready to deploy, they can submit a picture and we'll make a doll with that service member's image on it. So the kiddos have it, mom or dad's not home at night, but they can still cuddle the doll when they're heading to bed.
Oh, wow.
And then we do, so that's kind of a fun one. We do holidays for heroes where, again, they're getting a warm meal. They're getting to meet with different resources that are out there. So there's clothing assistance and hats and jackets and mittens and gloves, and there's entertainment, and Santa even comes, and the kids to visit with Santa, and they leave with a gift as well. So, that's just kind of scratching the surface of what we do, but I would say those are our biggest outreach programs probably right now.
I hear a lot and read a lot about veterans who are in need of services, whether you talk about the food insecurity issue, sometimes it's an issue with illness or substances or just basic housing. How big of a problem are some of these more serious issues for Siouxland vets?
I don't think people realize what the need is right here in Siouxland. The number of families that come through every month, that this is the groceries that they're going to be getting. So this year alone, I kind of looked it up. In our fiscal year of 2022, we have given away over $30,000 in emergency grants. So we have distributed over 1 million pounds of groceries. And we just started our food pantry within the last few years. So, to know that there's that need for people to come through and get their groceries. In total, we've done over 60,000 in emergency grants. We've provided over 6,000 hot meals. So there's a need, and it ranges. Those needs start with current service members who are maybe newly enlisted or getting ready to go on their first deployment, and they need some extra help, all the way up to our veterans who, whether it's an emergency grant or they just need us to help them make that connection. Is there another agency that could help them with their need? And we're able to step in and do that as well.
I think sometimes people are surprised at, some of the issues that veterans have when they leave the service, because we often hear about how people are sometimes wanting to join one branch of the military because they want to pay for college, they want to learn a skill, they want to get out and be able to do something, and sometimes it's harder than we think for them to kind of get back into the mainstream.
Right, reintegration can be hard. They get set in that way, and they have that regimented. Here's what you're going to do. Here's what's going to be done for you, and then suddenly it's back to real world, and it's do what you want to do. And, you have to go out and find that job. You have to go out and pay those bills and find your place to live and that place of employment, and making sure that it's, you're maintaining that. It can be hard. I remember when my husband has come home even some of the little things people don't think about. We had to change the temperature we keep our house because where he was for a year, the average temperature was over 100 degrees. So when he came home in September, early September, he's wearing jeans and a hoodie and a jacket. And I'm like, what is going on? So even some of those little things that people don't think about can be difficult for them when they come back home.
How do you fund supporting Siouxland soldiers? Because you do many expensive things through your organization, providing food and connecting them with services.
Our mission is 100% off of donations and grants. We are a nonprofit. We do different fundraising opportunities, and then we do apply for different grants. We have kind of our big fundraiser that we're doing this year. We really don't do many fundraisers with the exception of asking for donations. But this year we're excited. We're having a dueling pianos event at the Hard Rock, and all of that money from the ticket sales and the event will go back to our organization.
That is this upcoming weekend?
That is Friday night at the Hard Rock.
Is there anything special that you do like on Veterans Day?
Not that we're specifically doing. So our big event is that Friday night at the Hard Rock. And then on Veterans Day, there's just so many different resources out there. There's different free meals and things like that. So we don't do anything specifically on Veterans Day. I think this year it's a little bit unique because it is on the weekend. So that's why we're doing our event on Friday night.
How can people support the veterans? You talk about your mission and the food bank, providing food, providing services, hooking up servicemen with the things they might need. What can the rest of us do to help out?
Yeah, so we are always looking for volunteers for our events. If you follow our Facebook page, Support Siouxland Soldiers, there will be different opportunities throughout the year if you're somebody who likes to get in there and get their hands dirty and do. We're always accepting donations. We were part of Big Give. We have a donation platform on our page. And then just, really remember your servicemen and women. Thank them for their service. Be a friend. Be as supportive as you can when you meet someone. I always try to thank them for their service because not everyone heard that when they came home.
That was Rachel Chappell of Support Siouxland Soldiers talking about the work of the nonprofit to support veterans when they return to Siouxland and to help their families as well. The group's yearly fundraiser, Dueling Pianos, is being held Friday night at the Hard Rock Hotel and Casino. You're listening to The Exchange on Siouxland Public Media. I'm Mary Hartnett. Today we're talking a little bit about Veterans Day, which is this Saturday, November 11th. On Veterans Day, a lot of us remember D-Day, the name given to the June 6, 1944 invasion on the beaches of Normandy in northern France by troops from the U.S., Canada, and the United Kingdom and other countries during World War II. The invasion effectively signaled the end of Nazi control of Europe and World War II. Many Iowans in Nebraska served in the war and in the D-Day invasion, and some of them were journalists. One of them that may have been forgotten in recent years was journalist Barney Oldfield. Oldfield and his fellow journalists parachuted behind the lines in Normandy before the invasion to cover the events. A few years ago, UNL professor of journalism and documentarian Barney McCoy created a documentary about Oldfield. I talked with him about the documentary a couple years ago. We begin with a short excerpt from that documentary.
13,000 U.S. airborne troops also parachuted in against German gunfire. With them went 6 war correspondents, recruited by Nebraskan and U.S. Army press officer Barney Oldfield. First, the journalists had to endure 15 days of physically and mentally grueling Army airborne school. Then they had to survive 5 successful parachute jumps. All this for a chance to risk their reporting lives and for the first time ever jump into combat with U.S. soldiers.
My understanding from reading through his papers is Barney Oldfield had a distant relationship with the Barney Oldfield, the great race car driver of the early 1900s. Barney Oldfield, the race car driver, was the first human being to drive 1 mile in less than a minute. And so that was his claim to fame. And then Barney Oldfield, the race car driver, actually had some parts in early silent films he was also involved in. But in one way, shape, or form, when Barney Oldfield was born in Tecumseh, Nebraska, his father said, you know what, I'm going to name my son after the first Barney Oldfield. And interestingly enough, they actually had a really good relationship. They stayed in touch with each other. They had met each other when Barney Oldfield here was a reporter for the Lincoln Journal back in the day. And that's where the relationship really sprang up, and they stayed in touch through the rest of the earlier Barney Oldfield's life. But
now he went to UNL. He got a degree in journalism, and then he worked at the newspaper there in Lincoln, right?
Very good, yes. And he loved entertainment. He had always been fixated on becoming an entertainment reporter and wanting to go to Hollywood, and actually was kind of like the Nebraska bureau reporter for one of the Hollywood newspapers for quite some time, and he would do movie reviews and that kind of thing. But yeah, he was really very gifted as a journalist. And when World War II came along, he enlisted. He became one of the first to be trained as an airborne Army soldier. And when World War II came along, was a public information officer who helped to work with the correspondents who all wanted to be involved in the reporting of the D-Day invasion.
I just think it's interesting, going from interviewing Clark Gable and Shirley Temple and doing this sort of Entertainment Tonight radio show out in Hollywood to then going to work with Dwight Eisenhower.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I think he was attracted to not just celebrities, but to people who were very influential. He had a great deal of reverence towards Dwight D. Eisenhower and towards the generals that he reported to in the airborne, and ultimately had been able to convince months before the Normandy invasion on June the 6th of 1944, what if we could somehow recruit some war correspondents that would be willing to go through airborne jump school, go through the training, complete successful jumps, so that they would actually be able to fly with the airborne hours before the kickoff of that invasion and parachute behind enemy lines and be there and report as the airborne soldiers attacked from behind.
I watched some of the report that was on NET about Barney Oldfield, and he said something to the effect of, if you didn't know what fear was, you would find out when you were standing there, waiting to be, shoved out of this plane over Normandy. You knew.
Absolutely. And to put that into some perspective for you, those planes were flying in at very low altitudes, and it was pitch dark. And they would look out that open door, and the only light they would see was the light of the moon on that night and the arc of the German tracer fire firing from the ground, trying to pick off as many of those paratroopers in the air before they hit the ground as they could. And that's what they were jumping into. So if you talk about a literal leap of faith, it was.
I couldn't help but think, just from a reporter's point of view, maybe today young reporters don't know how heavy a typewriter is. He had a typewriter.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he had a typewriter. In fact, it's sitting behind me here in my office. And it's the same typewriter that Barney had since the early 1930s, when he first began writing as a cub reporter for the Lincoln Journal here in town. And it went with him around the world. Everywhere he went, it was one of those, extremely portable typewriters. But as a paratrooper, before they even began recruiting correspondents, he wanted to jump with that typewriter to see if it would withstand the force of, jumping out of a plane and landing on the ground. And that was the prototype that they used to prove that, yes, in fact, a correspondent could jump with their typewriter and make it and be able to, report and get dispatches out once they hit the ground in France and beyond, all the way into Berlin.
I hadn't realized that they were doing, when I first read this, they were going before. They had to go through enemy territory. Is that right? That sounds extremely dangerous.
Oh, yeah. No, they were parachuting into enemy territory, and there was active combat going on from the moment they hit the ground. The Germans knew that the Allies were coming. They didn't know exactly when, they didn't know exactly where, but they had prepared all kinds of defensive positions on the ground. Part of the airborne invasion also included gliders, that the Germans had put up these huge stakes along the ground in Normandy, so the gliders would hit these stakes and be destroyed. They had flooded fields to keep the gliders from being able to land, or if paratroopers landed, they might drown. So they had really done a good job of trying to dig themselves in. They knew that there was going to be this onslaught. There was no secret that this invasion was pending.
So they landed.
They did.
And they got through, and
Yes.
they started sending reports. Is that right?
Yes, yeah. All 6 correspondents were able to make it back alive. One of the correspondents broke his leg, but that was the worst of the wear and tear that happened. He broke his leg when he parachuted and hit the ground awkwardly. But they, from the get-go, Bob Rubin was the first of those correspondents to be able to hit the ground. There were roughly 13,000 airborne paratroopers that jumped in the early morning hours of June the 6th. And Bob Rubin was in the very first plane of the hundreds and hundreds of planes that ferried those paratroopers over into the battlefield. He was number 6 to jump of the 13,000 that jumped. General Maxwell Taylor was number 2.
It seems incredible, the amount of danger that not just Americans, but English, French, all of the Allies are willing to go through and risk their lives because of the threat to all of our way of lives.
It was really interesting because Dwight D. Eisenhower knew that this was going to be an incredibly risky and costly operation. And he visited with many of the airborne soldiers before they actually took off from that airfield. And very frankly, had instructed the men that, many of you will not come back from this operation, and thanked them for being willing to really make that ultimate sacrifice. We talk about that term ultimate sacrifice, but when you really watch it play out in the letters and the descriptions that you hear from people like Barney Oldfield, but more specifically from the correspondents that landed in Normandy and were reporting on what they saw, it's a very, very powerful part of sacrifice.
There's a great story that I saw in material about this particular mission that Bob Rubin, who you mentioned before, who was an Omaha newsman, he sent a message via carrier pigeon. Is that right?
He had parachuted in. He decided I can either land in an open field where the Germans will see me and perhaps shoot and kill me, or I can go for the orchard. I'm going to go for the orchard. So he lands in this orchard, and he's now hanging about 5 feet off the ground. His parachute is stuck in the tree, so he pulls out a big knife and he cuts himself down. And in darkness, all of the soldiers were given these little clickers. They called them crickets. And that's how they would identify themselves to each other. They would, those little clickers, you click them on, and they kind of make a cricket sound. And so that's how they would identify themselves to each other, that they were friendly and not enemies. So, they're going through this darkness with these little clickers, and somehow he winds up jumping into a trench with General Maxwell Taylor. And, and now they're trying to get to this village where they need to take out and secure a bridge. And they're going through all these things. And let me see, I've got it right here. So now Reuben is saying, as we dog-trotted along one stretch, I noticed a soldier with a couple of cartons tied around his neck. They contained carrier pigeons. I talked him out of a pigeon, scribbled my first story, fastened it to the bird. We shooed him into the air. The story got through, the first story written from liberated France, and it was published throughout the world under the slug by carrier pigeon.
This is almost Game of Thrones stuff, with the ravens.
Yeah. It's just amazing. And of course, that carrier pigeon had to fly 150 miles back across the English Channel through enemy fire itself to be able to get to that pigeon coop where that message was given to Barney Oldfield, who could then share that with the world. So,
what did Barney do after the war?
After the war, for a while, he was back in Hollywood as a press agent for Warner Brothers. And then he was recruited to go actually and work for the Air Force as part of the, I think he was out in Colorado with a wing of the Strategic Air Command, and spent the rest of his career until he retired, I think in the early 1960s, as actually a member of the Air Force, although during World War II, he was an airborne and he was an Army officer. So, but then ultimately after that, he was in private industry for a while, but Barney really believed in the importance that journalists played in being the independent ears and eyes, observers, to be able to tell the world what was happening, particularly on the battlefield in remote locations around the world. And that was something that Eisenhower also strongly believed in, that having a reporter write in a newspaper article or make a broadcast and personally report on the efforts of the men and the women who were leading the Allied fight. It was huge for morale, not just on the battlefield where some of these soldiers would read their names or hear about their units, and knowing that the people back home were being informed about what they were doing, the sacrifices they were making, but also the husbands, the wives, the fathers, the mothers, the brothers, the sisters, everyone back in this country who were desperate to know, what their sons and daughters were doing as they fought in the war too.
Often we hear stories about people that were heroes, but we can't connect with them so easily. I mean, here's a guy from a little town in Nebraska who went to the University of Nebraska. He feels like anyone that we might have known or our grandparents would have known.
Yeah, exactly. And again, Barney, he people described him and they go, we could never tell. He was like the P.T. Barnum sometimes. He was a great storyteller, and sometimes we had to try and figure out where the fact began and the myth ended. But he was really determined to make sure that journalists were represented. He was a co-founder of the Radio and Television News Directors Association back in the early 1960s. But, something else that I think that was really important to make notice of is that Barney never forgot his origins here in Nebraska. And he and his wife, Veda, raised millions of dollars that have helped to fund scholarships for students to this day here in this college and across the university, for people that otherwise wouldn't be able to attend college. And I also thought it was really classy. A lot of those scholarships were named on behalf of some of the first American soldiers from Nebraska that died in the Normandy invasion.
I know you're working on a documentary, is that right?
Yes, my next objective is to take this story and to expand it and build on it, and more completely talk about the role that these correspondents played as they not only landed in Normandy, but certainly in the case of Bob Rubin, went all the way to Berlin in the pivotal battle, the Battle of Berlin, which ended the war effectively in Europe.
That was University of Nebraska-Lincoln professor of journalism and documentarian Barney McCoy. As he says, he's working on a documentary about the journalists who worked behind the lines in World War II. As we look ahead to Veterans Day on Saturday, November 11th, local historian Russ Gifford has some thoughts about the holiday's history and its importance today. Gifford says it can be easy to forget that Veterans Day was first Armistice Day, commemorating the end of the First World War. He says a century later, we are still not past the repercussions of the world's first international conflict. And in recognizing the American veterans of that war, then-President Woodrow Wilson changed how we look at the world.
I mean, imagine it as a placid lake, and you take this huge rock and throw it into that lake. Those waves created by the event that we now call World War I are the things that would go on to shape the entire 20th century. 100 years later, we still are not past all of the ripples that have come from that. And thus it was, fitting that Wilson would step forward with that. But we have to remember, at the moment when he did that, America technically had not recognized the end of the war yet. It would be 1926 before we get around to saying, oh, well, we've accepted this, because we withdrew from all of Europe, from all of those international entanglements as soon as we could. Yet we could not get away from the fact that 53,000, American men died in battle. But of course, to the people back home, there's another 63,000 that died outside of battle, 45,000 of those from that pandemic that swept through that we call the Spanish flu, but of course really should be called the Fort Leavenworth flu that we exported to the entire world. It's not until 1938 that FDR makes it one of the 4 national holidays. And when he did so, he said the same thing Wilson said, and the same thing that everybody since had said. We should celebrate this with parades. Do not let it fade from the knowledge of the present. Do not let this, this grand sacrifice go unnoticed, because we might not be here to remember this without that sacrifice. And then, of course, it's 1954 before Ike will sign the law commemorating it. But then, of course, right afterwards, they change the name from Armistice Day to Veterans Day, because the law that Ike passed, of course, says we're going to celebrate all veterans, and especially the veterans that lost their lives in not just World War I, but all of our conflicts. We talk about what presidents did. This started locally. All of these actions by presidents happened because of the commemorations that local people were doing to remember their loved ones. And thus the local parades, thus the events at the cemeteries, thus the solemn reminders of the hole that had been left by these people and their sacrifice.
That was local historian Russ Gifford talking about the legacy of Veterans Day. There will be a Veterans Day ceremony tomorrow, November 11th, at 11 a.m. at Siouxland Freedom Park in South Sioux City. There will be a presentation of the colors, a 21-gun salute, and it will be followed with taps being played. Also, Saturday at 10 a.m. in Emerson, Nebraska, the Emerson Veterans Memorial Park will be dedicated. The memorial will feature 7 black granite stones with the names of over 800 area veterans, both living and deceased. That's it for this edition of The Exchange. Thanks to Mark Munger, Brett Hayworth, and Steve Smith. I'm Mary Hartnett. Have a great weekend.